In the spring of 2020, an IT administrator in Cincinnati opened his email and found a notice from Microsoft that would make the last 2 years of his life irrelevant. He had been grinding through the Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert exam track. 3 tests down, 1 to go. He had paid for the study materials. He had cleared it with his manager. He had the next exam booked. The email told him the entire certification was being retired. In 4 months, the credential he had been building toward would no longer exist. Not paused, not replaced with something equivalent. Retired, he was not alone. For nearly 3 decades, Microsoft had run the most trusted career credential in enterprise IT. More than 2 million professionals worldwide had earned a spot in that program. When Microsoft pulled the plug in 2021, it did not just retire a credential. It erased the ladder that an entire generation of IT workers had been climbing. For most of the 1990s and the 2000s, if you wanted to prove you could run a corporate network, if you wanted the job offer, the promotion, the salary bump, you needed Microsoft on your transcript. Not a generic IT degree, not a vendor-neutral certification. You needed the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer, or the Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate, or the Microsoft Certified Solutions Developer, the specific exam, the specific badge, the specific proof that you could operate the Microsoft ecosystem at a professional level. Microsoft launched the certification program in April of 1992. In the first years, the number of certified professionals was small, fewer than 10,000 by 1994. Then, enterprise computing exploded. Companies across the world standardized on Windows Server. SQL Server became the backbone of corporate databases. Active Directory became how organizations managed every machine, every login, every permission on their network. And the people who ran those systems needed credentials to prove they could do it. The momentum was staggering. By the spring of 2002, Microsoft announced that more than 1.2 million people worldwide had earned certification through the program. By 2007, that number had crossed 2.1 million. By the end of 2008, it stood at 2.3 million. And that was still more than 12 years before the retirement. The jobs that ran on these credentials were not fringe positions. Desktop support specialist, network administrator, systems administrator, database administrator. These were the people keeping hospitals online, keeping law firms running, keeping school districts functional. For large portions of corporate IT, the Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate was not optional. It was the filter employers used at the front door. Hiring managers did not read resumes that lacked it. Recruiters screened it before the first phone call. In many enterprises, it was the first thing human resources checked and the last thing they were willing to waive. Here's what Microsoft never told those 2 million people. The credential they were building careers around was built on a foundation Microsoft was about to demolish. In September of 2018, Microsoft announced a shift toward what it called role-based certifications. The language was optimistic. Cloud skills. Modern workplace. The future of the industry. What the announcement did not say plainly was that the existing credential tracks, the ones that had defined it hiring for a quarter century, were living on borrowed time. 18 months later, in February of 2020, Microsoft confirmed it. All remaining exams associated with the Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate, the Microsoft Certified Solutions Developer, and the Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert would be retired. The original date was June 30th, 2020. Microsoft then extended the deadline to January 31st, 2021, citing the disruption of the COVID pandemic. The extension gave candidates a few extra months. It did not change the outcome. On January 31st, 2021, every exam for every MCSA, MCSD, and mixed track went dark, a credential that had been the career benchmark for enterprise IT since the Clinton administration was gone. The disruption landed hardest on the people who were mid-track. Earning and mix required passing multiple exams in sequence. Candidates who had invested months of study, and in many cases hundreds of dollars in exam fees, prep courses, and study materials, were suddenly looking at a finish line that had been moved to a date they could not reach, not because they lacked the skills, because Microsoft had changed the rules after they had started the game. In the forums and certification communities, the reaction was immediate and uniform. People who had passed 2 of 3 required exams described the situation as a gut punch. Training companies that had built their entire curriculum around MCSA and MAX preparation had to scramble to rebuild from scratch. Boot camps that had been running the same prep courses for years suddenly had nothing to sell. The instructors who had delivered those courses, many of whom held the credentials themselves, found that their expertise was now being framed as legacy knowledge. Microsoft did provide a path forward. New role-based certifications anchored to Azure, to Microsoft 365, to the cloud products the company now wanted to sell. The Azure Administrator Associate, the Windows Server Hybrid Administrator Associate, the Data Analyst Associate. The catch was that these were not the same thing. The mix was a credentialing system built around what enterprise professionals actually did on the job, running Windows Server environments, managing SQL databases, administering on-premises Active Directory. The new role-based credentials were built around what Microsoft wanted enterprise it to become: cloud-dependent, Azure-reliant, subscription-paying. The professionals who had built careers around the old system were not being upgraded. They were being told to start over. And the hiring landscape had already begun reflecting the shift. Employers who had written MCSA and MCSE into their job requirements for 15 years were now scrambling to rewrite postings around credentials that were barely 3 years old. There is a pattern worth naming here. This was not the first time Microsoft had threatened to retire the certification infrastructure. In 2001, Microsoft announced that its Windows NT 4.0 credentials would not be retired after all, a reversal that came after significant pushback from the professional community. The certifications survived that moment. In 2021, there was no reversal, and the reason it held is not complicated. By 2021, Microsoft had fundamentally changed its revenue model. The company no longer made its primary money from selling Windows Server licenses or Seal Server licenses, the exact products that the MCSA and MIX validated. It made its money from Azure subscriptions, from Microsoft 365 seats, from cloud services billed monthly. Certifying people on-premises infrastructure was not a business priority. It was a legacy cost. The retirement was not an oversight or a miscommunication. It was a deliberate business decision. The platform that 2 million IT professionals had used to build careers was worth more to Microsoft as a discontinued product than as a maintained one. When the cloud math changed, the certification math changed with it. The professionals who depended on that platform were not consulted. They were notified. If you spent the last 10 or 15 years building skills around Windows Server administration, around SQL Server database management, around on-premises Active Directory, what this means for you is not subtle. The credential you held is no longer active on the Microsoft transcript system. If you earned in MCSA or MIX before 2021, it appears in your historical certifications section, not the active section. Historical, the same category as expired. The jobs that listed it as a requirement have largely stopped listing it. The new hiring benchmark is cloud-aligned, and the certifications that feed it were written by the same company that retired the credentials you spent years earning. This is not a reason to abandon Microsoft expertise. The skills are still real. Windows Server still runs inside most enterprise environments. SQL Server is not going away. But the official proof of those skills, the document that employers trusted, that job postings required, that defined what it meant to be a certified Microsoft professional, is gone. And Microsoft has not announced any intention to bring it back. For the professionals who are now mid-career, the calculation is harder than it looks. Rebuilding on the new credential track means investing time and money in a framework that Microsoft could, in principle, retire again whenever the business model shifts. The Azure Administrator Associate was introduced in 2018. The MIX was introduced in 1993. One of those lasted 28 years. The other has been in existence for 8. That history is worth sitting with before you decide how much to bet on it. The IT administrator in Cincinnati eventually found a path forward. he pivoted to the Azure Administrator Associate track and completed it. His mix attempt became a sunk cost, time and money that produced nothing transferable. He told his story in a forum post. Dozens of people responded. They all had the same story, different cities, different exam tracks, same ending. More than 2 million careers. Nearly 3 decades of professional development. One announcement, one deadline, and a company that moved on without looking back. The Microsoft Certified Professional Program is listed on the official Microsoft page under one heading now. Historical certifications, that is what they call it. Not retired, not discontinued. Historical, as if the 2 million people who built careers on it were the ones who belonged to the past, and not the company that pulled the rug out from under them. If you are watching this on a machine running Windows, there is a reasonable chance the person who configured your network learned their trade on those credentials. They passed those exams. They sat in those testing centers. They earned those badges. And when Microsoft decided that era was over, it did not ask them. It sent a notice and set a deadline and called the whole thing historical. Hit subscribe if you want to keep watching what Microsoft does when it thinks no one is paying attention. Because they are always doing something.